This is the history of Iran's nuclear program. In the 1950s, the Americans actually give Iran its first nuclear reactor. Back then, the West had a good relationship with Iran's leader, the Shah. Iran promises it only wants nuclear energy, but then Iran's enemy, Israel, acquires a nuclear weapon. All of a sudden, the Iranians start rethinking the whole not wanting a nuke thing. The Shah is overthrown in 1979 in the Islamic Revolution, and cooperation with the West on developing nuclear energy ends. At first, the new ruler, Ayatollah Khomeini, doesn't make a nuclear program much of a priority. But then another of Iran's enemies, Saddam Hussein, starts trying to get a nuke. Hussein's Iraq isn't just Iran's neighbor, it's been at war with Iran for the last decade in a brutal struggle that's resulted in over 1 million dead. So Iran decides that if its two biggest enemies in the region are going to have nuclear weapons, then it needs them too. In 1989, Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader who is still in charge today, comes to power and is more open than his predecessor to go for the bomb. By the mid-90s, it's clear to the Americans that Iran is quickly expanding its nuclear enrichment capabilities, even though they're telling the world they want a Middle East free of nukes. So, President Clinton begins sanctioning Iran by prohibiting any US entity from trading with the Iranians. A sanction, as defined by the Merriam-Webster dictionary, is an action that is taken or an order that is given to force a country to obey international laws. Fast forward to 2002, an opposition group within Iran reveals intelligence that the nuclear program is far more advanced than anyone thought. But American President George W. Bush pretty much ignores the emerging Iranian threat, because his administration is preoccupied with developing its campaign of lies to convince the world that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction, to justify its desired invasion and takedown of Saddam Hussein. In 2005, as a direct consequence of the American aggression in the region, the hyper-conservative Mahmoud Ahmadinejad becomes president of Iran. He defiantly calls for the expansion of Iran's nuclear program, calls for Israel to be wiped off the map, and calls the Holocaust a myth. The Israelis are now feeling threatened and growing impatient by the slow response to the Iran problem, so they begin planning an air attack against Iran's nuclear facilities. To his credit, Bush realizes this would create chaos, so he stops the Israelis from acting out their plans. But he also brings them in on a top-secret plan the Americans are almost ready to launch, called Olympic Games, a cyber attack operation targeting vulnerabilities in the security of the computer systems at Iran's most important nuclear facility. Then, the games begin. The centrifuges at Natanz start having a variety of problems, but the Iranian engineers at the plant have no idea they're under attack, as the breakdowns are designed to seem to them like random accidents. In 2009, President Obama takes office and chooses to continue Olympic Games at Bush's urging. But Obama also starts new, high-level talks with the Iranians, but progress on the diplomatic front is slow at first. The Iranians simply don't know what they're in for with Obama. The countries joining the Americans in talks are the 4 other permanent members of the UN Security Council: China, France, Russia, and the United Kingdom, plus Germany. This group is referred to as the P5+1 in international relations. Ahmadinejad wins re-election, but many Iranians think the vote is rigged and that Mir Hossein Mousavi is the real winner. Millions across the country hit the streets in protests that last 7 months. The government resorts to extreme violence and a crackdown on human rights. This Green Movement, as it's known, is the largest civil uprising in Iran since the revolution 30 years earlier that brought the current regime to power. Meanwhile, the NSA and Israel's cyber attack unit are creating a special code for the Olympic Games program, featuring a computer worm targeting the most important centrifuges at Natanz. Simultaneously, copies of the malware escape Natanz and begin replicating quickly across the internet and gain the name Stuxnet. Obama makes the tough call that it's now or never and authorizes Olympic Games a knockout blow. More than 1,000 critical centrifuges proceed to fail at Iran's prized nuclear facility at Natanz, setting back the country's pursuit of a bomb by up to 2 years. Then, 2 Iranian nuclear scientists have their cars bombed. The Israelis are widely suspected. The Western alliance then cuts Iran off from the international financial system. The US goes further and blocks Iranian oil exports. The UN then reports it suspects Iran is developing parts for a nuclear warhead at a military base. Around this time, a stealth US spy drone crashes 140 miles inside Iran's border with Afghanistan, and a month later, another top Iranian nuclear scientist is assassinated. But Iran keeps increasing its uranium enrichment capabilities, even though it's now paying a high cost. It's losing $8 billion a month because the EU is now helping to make sure it can't deliver its most valuable commodity, oil, to market. Dozens of massive Iranian oil barges appear all along its coast, acting as holding containers while the government scrambles to build more storage facilities on land. In August, the UN reports an underground nuclear site deep inside a mountain, which makes it much harder for Iran's enemies to attack, is almost operational. More sanctions hit the Iranian banking sector, and the economy begins to buckle. Iran's currency, the rial, has dropped 40% in value. People now have to carry huge wads of cash just to buy bread and milk. But the government stubbornly declares it will install even more centrifuges that are much more powerful than what it currently has. Meanwhile, quality of life is continuing to deteriorate as the government loses confidence it can keep the cost of basic goods from skyrocketing even further. And there's a run on Iranian supermarkets as people try to buy up everything they can get their hands on. Around this time, John Kerry takes over for Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, becoming the leading US negotiator with Iran. The situation is coming down to the wire, as the International Atomic Energy Agency reports Iran's nuclear program is dangerously close to crossing a red line that Israel has laid down as a trigger for an attack. So the US goes after the cash of Iran's top officials, including the supreme leader himself, that they have stashed in banks all around the world. Then, in June, Hassan Rouhani, a moderate, is overwhelmingly elected president of Iran. He campaigned on repairing ties with the West and negotiating to get the sanctions removed. Rouhani and Obama exchange letters and eventually talk by phone. After this historic chat, Obama tells reporters he believes there is a basis for an agreement. Next, a major breakthrough. Iran agrees to temporarily freeze its entire nuclear program to give the negotiators room to reach a deal. Throughout 2014, Iran agrees step by step to dismantle parts of its program, like shipping the vast amount of its nuclear fuel out of the country. And finally, the big news. The negotiators announced they have hammered out the major framework for a comprehensive deal to roll back Iran's nuclear program and guarantee it can only be used for peaceful purposes. It should be finalized by June 30th, 2015. Thanks for watching. You can watch part 2 of this series in which we break down the terms of the deal to roll back Iran's nuclear program by clicking on the screen. Or you can watch our explanation of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or our video running down the rankings of the best presidents in American history. Or you can go back to our channel and watch our latest videos and subscribe if you haven't yet. And if you want to support our channel and want to receive a free audiobook of your choice at the same time, we've got a link down below for a free month of audible.com. You have to put your credit card in, but you don't get charged for the first month, and for giving it a try, Audible will give us some much needed funds to help us keep making these videos, and all it costs you is nothing, plus you get a free audiobook. They have a whole lot you can choose from. Thanks for watching. Until next time, for the Daily Conversation, I'm Bryce Plank.